Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. So Daniel and I have been involved in this big series where we're talking about all these different aspects of cult psychology. And we've gotten to this point where we're talking about the great sociologist Max Weber and his different ways of thinking about, he has a weird phrase for it. He calls it legitimate domination. It sounds a bit saucier than what it ends up being, but like what kind of authorities people are willing to submit to in a way. And then what it says about society, and maybe even as we get to the end of all this, what it says about people psychologically. And so we've done, if you want to go back, we've done episodes on rational legalistic authority. We've done ones on traditional authority. We've done ones on charismatic authority. And now this is kind of a special one on what's going to be called patrimonial authority, like paying patronage. So we're going to talk about that one. And that'll be the subject matter of our little convine,
Mm.
conclave, whatever, a little powwow today. So,
Okay.
but before we get into the details of it, if you could do the wonderful thing that everyone always asks you to do, which is to like and subscribe and write a review if you can, or even if you just send out the episode to other folks. Daniel and I were just talking about that off mic. Sometimes you send an episode out to people and people come back and they have all kinds of interesting things to say about it. So it can be a real conversation starter too. So it helps us out and definitely labor of love for us. And we're trying to do good deeds in a funky ass world. So you can help us out. All right. This patrimonialism one is really interesting to me. I'm going to give a shout out to a couple of folks, Jonathan Rausch, who's the first person who kind of identified this as a thing. And we're trying to propose ways of looking at the world around this, and this might be a way of looking at like a certain set of what Trumpism is, if you want to like use this as a thing to think about that. And I also want to give it out to Jonathan Timothy Snyder, sorry, who's kind of like a scholar of fascist things, and he kind of threw this out too. So it isn't always mentioned. If you get like, I love this Faber and I want to do a deep dive, not very likely that that happens. You usually get these first three types mentioned that I kind of brought up earlier. This one doesn't always get talked about, but I think it's fascinating to think about. And then maybe at the end of it, we'll debate what we think is the right way to describe what's happening in the world now. So, okay, what is this patrimonialism thing? Anyway, before I start, anything you want to say, Daniel? You haven't had a chance
No,
to get
no.
your 2 cents in. You're good?
Yeah.
Um, okay, patrimonialism. So this isn't the idea where the primary thing is owing personal loyalty to whoever the person is who's at the head of the thing. And then how that's won is by paying patronage. So it's really where you can just kind of buy people off, which is a little bit different than charismatic authority, where you look at somebody and you say, well, they have some special aura about them. They're like Shea for the Oklahoma City Thunder. He just has aura. That's a Gen Z thing, Daniel. It's really funny
Yeah.
because my son talks
I
about
know.
that all the
I
time.
know. I get the reference, but I don't think anybody else is gonna. So.
Oh no, we might have some Gen Zers out there, and if
Oh, we
not,
do.
educational.
Right. The question is, are they NBA fans or not?
Could be, could not.
Right.
Yeah. There's a whole thing about like, like all of his charisma, which athletes can have, right?
Athletes definitely can.
Charismatic charisma,
But
right?
this is probably more along the lines of like Tony Soprano, which would be for our millennials
Yeah.
and Gen Xers who know this. Mob boss Tony Soprano, for those who are
My
familiar.
Gen Z or son would not know that, but our
Would not know it.
millennials would know that.
Millennials would know this one.
And our Gen Xers would know that for sure. And even our boomers, if we got some boomers hanging around.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the idea that you get loyalty based on service given to the ruler. And the problem with this whole thing that Weber points out is not, oh, sorry, let me double back on it because it's different than charismatic authority. In charismatic authority, you think, wow, this person's so awesome. I owe them something, right? And that can be good or bad, potentially, right? Um, we might take like a Buddha or a Jesus and say, hey, they had some charismatic authority and maybe they earned it,
Mm-hmm.
right? They
Mm-hmm.
earned that loyalty. Or other great spiritual figures, who have that kind of authenticity. The Dalai Lama, for people who follow him, or Gandhi or somebody might have a charismatic authority that's virtuous. So it's not all bad necessarily,
Right.
but there's a danger in it, obviously, that it can be sort of a corrupt charismatic authority for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our culty thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
or the traditionalist thing where the people who are in charge in the traditionalist setting and the psychology behind that is there's supposed to be some underlying traditional set of values and laws and so on, they're the guiding principle. So You can't just do anything under traditional authority, Weber would point out, in its pure form, because people go like, hey, wait a minute, that's against the Bible or against the Quran or against the Torah, and we have to debate this out, and that becomes a source of something you can hold over that
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
But
Guardrails.
yeah, and like what strikes me is fascinating is like a sort of a different psychological place of where you think the authority rests, right? Where in the patrimonialism, the idea is that it's just based on this sort of quid pro quo, sort of you can buy me off thing, the Tony Soprano thing you were talking about, loyalty and service to whoever the ruler is, and they seize that power for themselves, which is a different thing than really any of the other stuff we talked about,
Right.
right? And you can obviously point out a whole host of problems with that, but obviously you're gonna get a lot of corruption within that, like
Mm-hmm.
immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all the decisions are just being based on whatever the quid pro quo is a benefit to whoever the jefe is, right? So that's going to happen. And then even when there are people who are around that person, they're not there because they have qualifications in any way. They're just there because they have a usefulness to whoever the person is who's on the top of that
Right.
thing, who's sucking up all the resources to themselves.
Right.
So it undermines the whole structure of everything. And you were kind of talking about that off mic a little bit, that can happen. Even if we don't have this language, we can see it potentially in the world around us in different ways. Well, that person's just there because they're going to pledge unconditional loyalty to whoever the Tony Soprano is
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
top of this thing.
Yeah. You're useful because you have no willpower of your own.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You are my sock puppet.
yeah, yeah. And that's been kind of a debate about like whenever you see this kind of thing, why do all these people like kowtow to this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a certain sense, they're all angling too, probably as well,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's going to have their angle and everything falls apart under that.
It's also they get to be close. They get to be in a position that they would not be able to be in had it not been for their relationship with this person who has made it there. So that's their power adjacent position.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not they
Yeah,
wouldn't not on their own merits. No fucking way.
that's true too. That's a good
No.
point, right? When you frame it that way or emphasize that.
Right. And they know that. But if they can, if they're willing to, take this person out or do this thing that this person wants done, then that's their benefit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they're useful this to whoever the big daddy is on the top of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we
Pop,
say daddy because usually it's daddy, Big Papi.
Papi Grande.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, when we get to these other kind of authorities, what's also interesting about it, too, if you get to something like rationalistic legal authority, we got an episode on it, right? But usually you're trying to go and set up laws to hold these kinds of things in check,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a natural, and Weber's wise in pointing out, there's a natural hostility between all these different kinds of authorities. They fight one another, right? I think that's a deep observation,
Yes.
you know, they archetypally clash. Um, but it's, you could say it's especially a problem for just undermining that legalistic, rational kind of authority. It just like has to trash that
Yeah.
because it basically has to plow through that in order to like let the ruler's will go through and like run right through, right? Oh, I hit the screen.
It's a little
I'm
bit
animated today.
if you
Yeah.
think about it, it's a little bit like, and I know there's the legality is involved here, but it's a little bit like the police and the bootleggers in the 20s in the United States. You have, or we'll use one person like the Al Capone and his people here because we're
Mhm.
recording in Chicago, and so it's local to us. But he was definitely somebody who is a mob figure, like a soprano.
Yeah.
Being in this patrimonial authority, butting up against a legalistic authority in the state government.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Even though the people who in the state government probably were drinking alcohol on their off time, in order to maintain the laws that they may or may not agree with, but because the laws are in place, they are tasked with enforcing the laws, and it supersedes their own personal opinion.
To the extent that they're willing to do that, or you can get the corrupt patrimonial authority to undermine that by like kickbacks and payoffs and
Sure,
these kinds of things. Yeah.
sure.
I'm not sure. I think I'm like, the real famous Al Capone thing is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And I think I'm right around the corner from that. I realized that a bit ago. Like it happened like right around the block from me,
Oh, okay.
where Al Capone gunned down all these people. I can't remember what the other gang was. But anyways, yeah. Personal trivia. Yeah, so it's a big deal, right? It'll do that. And one of the things that was kind of interesting for me in recording these episodes is I had to rethink Confucianism on
Hmm.
some level. And we had that happen, like I think when we did that legalistic rational thing, because I'm always a little bit wary of that. And we can talk about that maybe in follow-up episodes.
Sure.
I'm almost thinking that we might have to have another spot that would be more like spiritual authority or something. I don't know what to call it yet, but something that's addresses these questions. Weber recognizes that something like a Confucianism, if you don't know too much about it, it's lots of rules and laws. So you
Hmm.
try to hold everything in check. It's a kind of an extreme of legal rationalistic stuff. We're going to set up a
Hmm.
whole hierarchy. We'll have everybody have their place. And Weber recognizes that that can be crushing
Right.
to individual people.
Right.
And I'm empathetic to that position because I'm more of a Taoist Zen tantric dude, and that's always spoken to me. But in China, they had this thing they called the complete reality school, where they tried to blend Taoism and Buddhism, Zen stuff, especially, and Confucianism. And I always was like, I don't really need the Confucianism there. I can just take that,
Throw it out.
get rid of that. But now I can see, no, that's a big deal because it's the way that you have to hold people in check somehow
Hmm.
on a societal level. And you and I have had conversations about that. I think about this in between the episodes. Sometimes, when we have one of our interesting chats, and then, we haven't talked till the next episode. Sometimes we chat in between, sometimes we don't. But, you were in these places where you saw like legalistic rational authority collapse. Like you were in the military and you were in these places where stuff collapsed.
Correct. Yeah.
And I went back and I kind of I remembered and like was thinking about those comments of yours over the years whenever that issue has come up.
Mm.
Because you're very sensitized to that point, right? You need to have something that will make that structure. It's not
Correct.
just that you're a Capricorn.
It's not only
It's
that.
not just that.
No, that's a big part of it. But
But it's also based on experience as well as astrological karma, you
yes,
know? And you see that and you're like, well, if you don't set up something like that, you're going to get a bunch of warlords, which is what the problem they had in China.
correct. Correct.
You'll have patrimonial authority.
And that's the problem we had in Afghanistan. Have, and that's the problem we have had in Iraq. I mean, and anywhere where you go. I mean, it's a problem that they're having in Syria. I mean, all over the place. So yeah, there's pros and cons to having any of these structures, and we could call them governments if you want, better than structure. Having a government, duly elected or not, there is an overarching oppressive force, which can be obviously not good for the people who live in it. But then to your point, when you remove it, well, then there's going to be another force that takes over. They might just be smaller groups, but they're going to be fighting for power, and they're going to look a lot more like this patrimonialistic type of authority with the person who is taking the head at the table, and then if somebody else wants power, then they're going to pop him, and they're going to do that. And it's all men, by the way. That they're going to take that and they're going to do that. Like that's how it's going to go, and that's arguably, I mean, they're both bad, but probably on a local level, the independent gangs being in charge or independent groups being in charge is probably more dangerous than
Mm.
having one has like a societal oppressive feeling, and then there's because people get used to having some freedoms. I remember when we were in Iraq, and if I've said this story before, please turn your brain off for a moment, but we were talking because we were collecting intelligence. We were talking to this local guy, and I was like, well, how are you feeling now that and the conversations are happening not in English, obviously. I was like, how are you feeling about how things have been going, since the arrival of of the troops? And he said, honestly, it's been much more difficult. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I'm not able. First of all, there's curfews. I'm unable to get to the market on time to be able to set my things up, and then if I have to stay later to close down or make some extra
Mm.
sales or whatever to feed my family, money to feed my family. And he means it. It's not like a euphemism. Most of the time here in the US, not most of the time but regularly, people say I need to feed my family, but like you have enough money to feed your family for quite some time. Now some people are really struggling, I'm not saying that, but most of the time that's a euphemism. It doesn't mean what it does. But for people in other
Not so literally. Yeah.
yes,
On a
but
daily basis. Yeah.
in other places, people make money, spend money. Or they barter or whatever. That's what they do. That's for the day. That's the end of it. So he was saying that, before it was dangerous, but there was some expectation that he can get to where he needed to be with some amount of physical danger, but that he could do what he needed to do to take care of his family, and pay off who he
Mm,
needed to pay off. But now that there was a different kind of authority in charge, there was no budging with this.
mm.
So,
Yeah, and that's kind of Weber's critique, right? If you
yeah,
set it
yeah,
in too harsh, right?
yeah,
And then people like you're screwing people over.
yeah,
That's profound. I haven't heard that example before, Daniel. I don't think you did talk about that in the podcast. Thanks for sharing it. It's deep. I guess maybe one of the things you can do as we're all trying to learn about this is you can think, okay, so what was happening in Afghanistan before? It was probably like some kind of oppressive traditional authority,
correct. Yeah,
which kind of shows that all these things can go dark,
yeah,
right? Like you can look at the dark parts of like Iran and some girls get beaten and tossed off a building because they don't cover, their head properly or something, right?
mm-hmm.
Like you can get, you know, and I think in the United States, we're looking at, now we'll get to the end of it, but we're looking at some of the darker aspects of Christianity popping out.
Yep,
The Christian nationalist side
yeah,
of Christianity, like it's just not, it's the darker side of traditional authority, right? It
yeah,
can happen and it goes funky. Oh yeah, thanks for sharing it. It's like again, this has been pretty thought-provoking, all of this. Again, it's a kind of a different subject matter for us, right? That
yeah,
maybe would be our
totally.
normal wheelhouse, but I've been learning, looking at this,
Yep,
right?
yep,
I've been learning a lot.
mm-hmm.
Um, all right, so the thing is like it's going to undermine those formal structures. I like the word government. I like the word structure too, though, because it's kind of like a structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to put a structure in place that will hold things in check. It's even interesting thinking about it with like the Chinese five elements. This is like a tangent in a way, but it just hit me like when we do the five elements in Chinese medical culture, that's, Daniel's and I, that's our day jobs, right? And you say like the metal element phase has to do with structure, and it's how you hold back the wood phase, which has a lot of times can do with like aggression
Mm.
and like over aggression, the negative sides of those types of things. You need some
and
structure to hold that back.
and vision,
Yeah.
right? Aggression, yes, but also vision. So you're having people who are wanting to like enact their vision of how they think things should be, you know? And
Sometimes at the expense of others, right?
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Well, almost always at the expense of others. Although sometimes it's to the benefit of others, but some people just don't like that. They're like,
Yeah.
no,
It's weird when you
fuck other people. Like,
This is a deep question.
yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
not a,
So,
this is really deep.
but these are archetypal psychological underpinnings that
Yeah.
people have. And what's unique about this situation here, and it's not like it's not happening in other places in the world, but what's unique here is that we have a lot of different cultures, despite how it might look for some people will say, well, it's a majority white, population. Um, but they're not like you may be white on paper, and that's not that's not a pun or a euphemism. That just
Tends to the color of the construction paper.
right.
Some
But
of us are orange. We were talking about that
correct,
earlier.
that's right. However, your skin color does not dictate from where your family comes from. So if you're from Germany or if you're from Norway or Denmark or Scotland or Ireland or London, those are different cultures. You
Yeah.
know, they may look homogenous when they're here, but they have different traditions, and it depends on how far away they are from those traditions if they still keep any of those things, near and dear to their own heart, their own practice, their own life. But we're coming into this with people who have different influences, despite how the skin color looks. So, like on a gross level, from a census perspective, yes, everybody falls under this kind of purview of like non-white, Hispanic, white, or whatever all the boxes are that we could potentially check. But then when you go back to where these people are from, their genetics are very different.
Mm.
And yet we still end up with just like a small amount of archetypes that people will fall into these kind of like desires for authority.
Yeah, it's interesting because, well, I mean, one of the things to say is like if you look at like the popularity of our current president now, one of the groups he's falling out of favor with is like white dudes, like this guy over here, right? Two thumbs pointing at me. They were probably too much for him to my taste ahead of time, but There's people who, don't like it, right? Even though on some level you think that that would be part of his generic audience, but it's not that simple, right?
No, it's not.
And I've been really interested in like looking at these kind of Weberian, Max Weber kind of social structures as being kind of like personality types too. They're
Yeah.
archetypal on that level, and I
Yep.
find that fascinating.
Yeah.
That really interests me. And again, maybe we'll do a follow-up episode where we just consider that issue even some more. But I think that's amazing. And like you go around the people around you and you can look at people in your own community and go, like, oh, that's a traditional authority person. That's my Catholic friend for me
Mm-hmm.
in the neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
where I grew up. Oh, and that's my legalistic rational authority friend over there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my dude who really seems like he has something about charismatic authority, and that's what vibes with him. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason he keeps doing what he's doing. Like those are powerful things to say about people. And then when you get within groups of people, you probably find all that different stuff happening within that same group. You can just look around you, sometimes in your friend and acquaintance group and go, oh, I can see these tendencies within
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to really radically change, like, major things about how they think about life or how they think about how they want the world to look, right? Like that's, I guess, where this gets really profound. It's profound in so many ways, but one of the areas of profundity is like, it's going to completely change what you're going to try to advocate for the world
Right.
and what you're willing to kind of like put under other, like try to impose on others even, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's wild. Yeah, okay, so the patrimonialism, yeah, it's great. This is I'm learning. Hopefully other people are too, but I'm definitely feel like I'm learning. Okay, so the other thing that happens in this deal that Weber points out is that there's really blurry lines then. Like the public and the private sphere completely blurs because all of a sudden the state becomes an instrument of that person, and that state's now their personal property and their personal instrument of enforcement for whatever their own agendas are. And it goes like all ways. You sort of like you seize the state to serve your own interests, and you also sort of like to destroy the private sector outside the state because you're constantly imposing upon it your own will. So you're kind of trashing everything everywhere by like completely like blurring those lines and obscuring them, right? I think
Kind
it's
of
deep.
kind of like a Russian-esque.
Like Soviet-esque or which part?
No, I mean that like the state is sort of
Oh, like Russia now, the
yeah,
Putin
now,
Russia.
now,
Yeah.
yes, current Russia. Yeah.
Hmm. And you can kind of see that like in all the lawsuits that come out now. You don't like what someone does, you sue them,
Mm.
and then you're using the instrument of the state to enforce your own
Mm-hmm.
will.
Mm-hmm.
And like there was a whole big thing with the South Park episodes coming out now that are really swinging hard,
Yeah.
right? But before that, it was the lawsuit, right? And CBS had to pay him off so they can get their had to pay the Trump off so they could go and get their merger through, right?
Everyone's
You
trying to
didn't
get
do it,
off,
we're
man.
gonna yeah, yeah,
Everyone's trying to get off. We're all waiting for the second coming.
yeah. I mean, like even like this is we don't do news of the week, but the guy from Apple went to the White House and gave some special little fucking plaque that was 24 karat gold so he could pay off the patron, So it's patrimonialism, right? As it's like this thing blurs. So ultimately, like when you get to the end of this whole deal, you get to corruption, you get to opportunism, you get to inefficiency, and then you get to lack of accountability. And you were talking about examples of that too, Daniel, when we were talking off mic, and you can see these all over the place, right? All of a sudden, someone completely screws shit up, but as long as they're loyal to whoever, Big Poppy is, then that's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't work efficiently either, and Bibber points that out. Your legalistic rational authority will probably be the most efficient way of doing things, but you
Mm-hmm.
undermine that, and next thing you know, you got the whole thing kind of stocked up with all these people who are not there by any merits and qualifications. As you were pointing out, we talked about that with military stuff, right?
Mm.
You want to have the most qualified people. So you end up with corruption, opportunism, inefficiency, and then sort of no accountability, right?
Right.
Because the person in charge will tend to dole out punishments or rewards, not based on even whether you did a good job or not, but to what extent it benefits them, right? So the whole structure is kind of undermined. So you get loyalty over inefficiency and everything getting like kind of being done based on this idea of just rewarding the lackeys kind of thing. And that's the gist of it. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean it's relatable.
Yeah. So again, I think if you want to think about the world around you, this is probably like the closer part of this episode for me. We have this other structure that's kind of being thrown out here. Then you get to go through and you try to figure out like there's no doubt that there's been like a kind of like an authoritarian type vibe across the whole planet. Whatever that means, that's been happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a US thing, it's been happening in other countries too, right?
Yeah.
And so you saw these things in just recently, like, France, it was Le Pen, and then you had that kind of like far right Nazi adjacent party in Germany, and then you had the Canadians who rejected it, and the Australians who rejected it, and the French who rejected it, and Germany who rejected it. And probably, unfortunately, if you have this view of the United States, we were sort of like the canary in the coal mine that didn't get the opportunity to reject it first or something, right?
Yeah.
So we got kind of caught in the midst of it. But, it gets up with this question of like, I wanted to do this one because it really depends on what you think you're seeing in the world around you, right? To my mind, if I look at like a Trumpism, it has the main features of like a patrimonialism. That's kind of what that's about in some very core way, right? Or maybe that's who he is at the core, to my eyes. We can all look at this for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the best descriptor for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a lot of quid pro quo. And to the extent that he has an agenda, it's sometimes even hard to know if they're really his agendas.
Yeah.
What do I find interesting about it in the Weber thing is that I think, in a certain sense, projected onto him, and I mean, I'm interested in your opinion about this. Then you get people who are interested in these other things, but they're kind of funneling under the umbrella of that same, under like the umbrella of what Trumpism is or something, but they're not exactly the same. Like you get people who are probably traditional authority people who are also riding along in the same thing, and whether they see him as a representative of traditional authority or not, I think something is happening with that, right? That's kind of like the Project 2025 vibe,
Sure.
right? Those are people who are religious nationalists,
Yeah.
and they're along in this train too.
Well,
And
I mean, they're religious nationalists, but they're more. It's more than just that. Any uh, conglomeration of individuals is going to have a synthesis of intentions and desires, and then they're going to put forth a kind of a unified front. But it's not unified in that it's homogenous. It's not at all. They have their own
no,
things that are happening. So I think that there are, like anything else, there are, outside other influences that are hiding under this religious nationalistic viewpoint, you know,
mm,
because that's easier for them to sell, right? They attach themselves onto a larger idea, and then co-opt. They don't even co-opt that idea; they just hide behind it. It's like if you believe yourself to be a Republican or a Democrat or independent or non-affiliate or whatever, in saying that you're one of those choices, the idea is that you believe the majority of the things that those people believe generally, you know? And so I feel like there's a lot of other forces that are hiding behind some, the movements because they're not popular enough on their own to be a movement by themselves.
oh, that can happen that way too. Then
You
you
know what I'm
that's
saying?
political action almost, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, I think like to me, the people who are within this sphere who are kind of more like the Christian nationalist types, and there are like people in this that you can almost name by name, right? Like a what's his name? Russ Vogt or whatever is like one of those dudes. He's like, I'm a Christian nationalist. He's the guy who controls the money within the Trump administration. And he's one of the main voices behind Project 2025, which is like part of the agenda, right? It's Project 2025 agenda. So he's there and he's like the economic person, and he's like, yeah, I'm a Christian nationalist. I want to like take my version of Christianity and impose it upon everyone. That's who the dude is, right?
Right. But
And
what I'm
so,
saying is he's part of a movement. It's not.
yeah, yeah, he is. There's a whole bunch of other people who
Correct.
identify as Christian nationalists too. That doesn't mean that everyone who's a Christian is a Christian nationalist.
Correct.
Doesn't mean that,
Yes.
right? It's a movement of people, right? and it's whatever the percentage of the population is, right? 20 something, whatever that group of people is.
Yeah.
But they're part of like, I think what's happening. Now, I don't know, like we had talked about it before. I listened to like David French, another journalist, lawyer, is kind of right-wing guy, as sort of like a voice on this, but someone who is on the right who's like against Trumpism, right? And he's the guy who we talked about a few episodes that he was at his dad's funeral and he was getting notes from people saying, I know it's your dad's funeral, but I really don't like your attitude about Trump. And his wife was like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? I think she said, what the hell? Like, so I think, when you get into that thing, I don't know when I'm trying to diagnose this for myself, whether or not part of what's happening there is that people within that traditional authority mindset, that psychology, want to project that onto this figure who they see at the top of this thing, who want to like project a religiosity that isn't there, right? But when you hear that being talked about, a lot of times it's like this idea of and people who are in those circles talk about it. I'm not in them, I'm listen to other people who live in those spaces more than I do. I try to pay attention to some
Hmm.
of those right-wing Christian spaces to understand them. But the
Yeah.
people who explain it are like, yeah, there'll be this whole thing of like, well, God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes he chooses a messenger who's really, you know, uh, not
Flawed.
the most worthy messenger, the flawed messenger theory of things, and so on and so forth.
But that goes back to our charismatic discussion about being necessarily extraordinary, right?
Yeah, I wonder about that because I feel like, again, I'm just trying to be a diagnostician on this. If I like were to diagnose this most directly, I want to do the patrimonialism because to my eye, I was like, oh, that's the most like on target of what all this looks like,
Hmm. Hmm.
depending on how you look at it. But there's obviously like other streams that are happening here. And then if I get to the psychology of it, some of that might be maybe what you were alluding to, sort of like opportunism. Okay, well, this is my
Hmm.
chance to get my agenda pushed forward by
Hmm.
glomming onto this person who has momentum, right?
Hmm.
So I think that can happen for reals. And I also feel like psychologically, though, it can be like, well, even because of the cognitive dissonance, you want to project something onto this person. So all of a sudden you make that person into a more traditional person than what they really are. And all of a sudden you come up with this whole cognitive dissonance rationalization of like, okay, he's really a traditional authority figure, even though he doesn't seem to be,
Hmm.
because you have to rationalize that out maybe because psychologically at the core you're a traditional authority person and you're uncomfortable with the idea like I'm just gonna like support some corrupt Tony Soprano guy.
Hmm.
I'm gonna have to do some major internal operations psychologically to make that seem like that makes more sense or something, right?
Yeah, but
I might have to really twist that up. If I
I,
if we buy into the idea that like there is a traditional authority psychological type, which I'm proposing there is.
yeah, no, there is. I'm not sure that, there's a couple things. I don't know how much people think about this shit just in general, you
Yeah, but
know?
people don't know if they're extroverts or introverts or metal phases or
That's
wood
what I'm saying.
phases or
So it's like,
anything.
so they go and
But they are those
they
things.
are those things for sure.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people are doing things or making decisions or choosing or whatever, there's not a whole lot that goes into it. It's like what feels right. You're choosing based off feeling. And so some of these kind of conversations that we're having are the people are unaware of them.
Hmm.
It's like you're describing some forces in the world that like someone is not even privy to. They're like, wait, what?
But
Like
it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like the Jung thing from the shower curtain of wisdom. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll govern your life and you'll call it
correct,
fate.
correct, correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like to me, the educational part is directly in the wheelhouse you're talking about.
Yeah.
But like if I wasn't listening to like, let's say just a David French, or I've listened to other people who are in the Southern Baptist Convention, but who got out. And they're like, hey, listen, I'll tell you what's going on there. There's a whole bunch of rationalization. I would see it as rationalization,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call it, going on around this person to try to imbue them with some kind of traditional authority that might not be the accurate diagnosis to who that person actually is.
Well, I mean,
But other people might be just like, oh yeah, I know this isn't true, but I'll roll along with it, you
yeah.
know. But I think like for a lot of people, if I look at, I got a lot of born again relatives, and I think, they're probably having to rationalize this out.
Now,
And
question:
like, yeah.
do
Mhm.
they celebrate the birthday that they were born with, or the one when they were born again, or do they get two? Because if you get two, that's just kind of bullshit. That's a lot of presents as an adult.
They probably get the double gifts thing going.
Is that
But to
who
be
the?
honest, they had the gift of the Holy Spirit, Daniel, which is
Oh,
a gift every day.
oh.
So every day for them is like a birthday.
Do they have to do? Do you have to do their chart over again?
In some places they might, but they wouldn't
Really?
believe in that because charts are the work of the Antichrist, Daniel.
Oh no. So in a
Those are
so
demonic forces. Witches and magic users have to be taken out to the end of the community and thrown off a cliff, along with
so
a sacrificial goat.
so what you're saying is that there are not a lot of born again astrologers.
That I can't answer entirely because we might have some funky shit going on there. That might be the
Okay.
case, but you're not supposed to.
So my
Those
no
are like those are like teenage girls from like born again families who are hanging out with their friends in the basement doing their
yeah,
charts.
man.
Yeah. And they secretly have their tarot deck like hidden under their bed. That's
Totally.
actually a thing. I've listened to that.
Wouldn't surprise me.
There's like a kind of a concern about that.
Who
But
doesn't love
like to
tarot?
me, like, the psychology of it has to be kind of important.
Yeah.
Like you don't know you're under the thrall of an archetype, but you may be. If you're under this thing of traditional authority, and then like what we kind of alluded to here and there in some of the episodes we talked about, then if there's like a major sexual scandal thing,
Right.
like the Epstein thing, and all of a sudden it's getting too close to the people in your team, how do you handle that? You know, and all of a sudden you're gonna repress it, right? Because you just don't have to deal with that. Then that's part of traditional authority too, of course, but you have to like say, I have to have a reason to repress that.
Mm,
I can't just pretend I'm going to repress it just because this guy's fucking Caesar or Tony Soprano.
right.
That's not good enough.
No.
I have to have a better reason to repress it. He better be some traditional authority person that he's not.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, again, this is my diagnostic wheels turning, but even in the charismatic side, I think there are people who just find him to be this awesome, magnetic, super figure, right? And I'm almost saying I think that's a different group of people, maybe even than the traditional people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think we should. I think next episode, and we'll probably cut it here. Um, we will go. We will do a kind of a brief sort of rundown of all the types of authorities, and then list them as like archetypes and associated people who might be attracted to which one.
Yeah, I think there's a certain truth in it. We could even maybe propose like we were talking about earlier. I think maybe we have to like have a G&T authority. What would G&T authority look like? It'd have to look a little bit different, you know.
WWG and TD.
DOM,
Yeah.
GOT Dom.
All right, brother. Thank you so
All
much
right,
for
thank you, Daniel.
for
It's
joining us.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks so
definitely.
much.
Audience, thank you for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe. Send us an email, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hit us up on the podcast on the Instagram at the Gin and Tantra Podcast. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.